Hi, this is Matt Renfro. This is Module 14 for AEP 55. This is a case study. First thing we're going to do is summarize the case. So Richard Inman is the principal at Rocket Junior High. He has worked hard at building relationships with some of his harder to reach students by staying after school and playing basketball with them. This has worked. He has seen an improvement in their behavior at school as a result of this relationship building. However, one of his students, James, has had frequent tardies as of late, and so Richard decides to call him down to the office to speak to him about this. On his way down to the office, James's fifth period teacher witnesses him in the hallway exchange something with a student. It appeared to be suspicious. They were concerned it may be drug activity. So Richard calls James down to the office. He calls David Ramos, the young man who was seen in the hallway with James exchanging something down in the office. And he also decides to have a police officer come down to the office as well to find out what's going on. Upon investigation and interrogation, David Ramos is found in possession of brass knuckles. James ultimately admits that they are his brass knuckles. He's got a sordid past there at the school. He has a record. And they did not belong to David, who happens to be an honor student with no record whatsoever. So James has admitted that these are his brass knuckles. However, David was the one on his person. As a result, the police had to arrest both David and James for felony possession of a weapon on school grounds. Despite the fact that James admitted that not only was it his brass knuckles, but he forced David to have these brass knuckles by threatening him with physical violence. Despite that, they were both taken to a youth detention facility. That's the protocol for the district. David's mother shows up. She is very upset. She's concerned why her son is being punished for something that he was physically forced into doing. And she leaves with no resolution. Richard ultimately follows procedure by filling out disciplinary paperwork on James, but he refuses to fill out paperwork on David based on his morals. So Richard is instructed by his superior to follow procedure and fill out paperwork on David, or there will be consequences. And that is essentially where the case ends. So let's now take a look at the people involved. So the parties involved, we have Principal Richard Inman. We have James, who's a 13-year-old muscular tattooed student, larger build. James is fifth period teacher. You have David Ramos, 13-year-old Latino student, honor student. There's the police officer. There's David's mother, who I'm presuming is Latino, since David is as well. And then there's the director of secondary education, who instructed Richard to follow procedure and report both of the students. It's taking place at Rocket Junior High. It appears to be a suburban public school. The specific incident at hand occurred in the hallway of the school. And this school appears to have a fairly diverse student body, 900 students, including students from the south side of town. I had to infer that this is a diverse student body with the way they were referring to the south side of town. At no point does it describe the demographics of the south side of town, but I think it's safe to say, at least from my inferences, that this is probably a socially, economically challenged part of town, probably a fair amount of poverty. This is, again, an inference, but I think it's a safe one. So the legal issues, the ethical issues, stakeholders here. As far as the stakeholders are concerned, I feel that it's David primarily. I mean, it's his future success that is now at stake by going to a 45-day alternative education program and having this on his record is going to do, it's going to negatively impact his opportunities for future education, higher education. And his mother is also a stakeholder because that's her son. And so I feel that these two are the primary stakeholders in this scenario. James's actions pose potential harm to David. And by harm, I mean his harm to his future. His actions did pose physical harm. He did threaten him with physical harm, but I think the real threat here is to David's future. But there was also the target victims that James was intending on using these brass knuckles on. Those people were also could be potentially harmed in this situation. The legal issue here is the felony possession of a weapon on school grounds. And then the school also has their own private policy, which mandates a 45-day alternative education program that both young men are to be sent to. So as far as the ethical and legal decision making, if I could summarize what's happening here in one sentence, it would be that, as a result of James' actions in conjunction with school and state laws, David Ramos is being unfairly subjected to punishments that will negatively impact his future. The issue with the law is that it's not subjective. It's very black and white. And so therefore, at this point, legalities are now interfering with what is ethically right and wrong. Oftentimes, laws get lost in translation when it comes time to factor in ethics, and that's what's happening in this case. So next, looking at evaluating the ethical dimensions of the issue, and this is a crucial step Richard took in this case. Following procedures and expectations that have been established through a collaborative effort involving multiple professionals within a building are important steps to ensure others are acting ethically. Technically speaking, David has committed a felony, but at the same time, he was forced into this situation. So yes, it's right to follow a procedure that says, okay, the student has clearly violated this law and this law, so this punishment has to happen. But there are other factors that have to be looked at if you're actually and truly going to act ethically in a situation. So I will say first and foremost that the end result here with what Richard's decision was, I completely agree with. There really isn't anything I would change in as far as that in that part of the situation. However, there's one thing that I really would do differently if it were me, and that would be that I would not have called in the police officer. That maybe you take that step next, but I mean I don't see why we had to bring in a police officer at that time. I'm not saying it's not appropriate to bring in police officers in the school when you have conflicts, but at this point, it's innocent until proven guilty in this country. And I feel that bringing in that police officer that early in the process was already assuming that there was guilty parties here. We were simply going on hearsay from what a teacher saw in the hallway. And so that is definitely something that I would have done differently in this situation. I think I also would have tried to speak to David's mother a bit more. She was very upset, rightfully so. And I think Richard knew deep down that he wasn't going to punish David. It's the minute she leaves the office, he's contemplating why he hasn't advocated for David more. He needed to be a little bit quicker on that, and I think he could have done a little bit of damage control with Mom earlier on in this process. Richard used his understanding and capacity to undertake and implement ethics within the school setting. So what I was speaking to before about how, yes, there are laws and rules set in place, but there are things that have to be considered when you bring ethics into the equation. And in this case, it's the character of David's integrity. He's involved with extracurricular activities. He's a trombonist. He has no record of misconduct whatsoever in the school. He is an honor student. And on top of all that, he was physically threatened to hold the weapon. And so when you take these things into consideration, you cannot charge David as being as guilty as James in this scenario. Not even close. He has no guilt whatsoever, in my opinion. I apparently will need to continue this in a second segment because this is stopping shortly. So I will add a second segment.